We are born free.
And we will die free.
The time in between, though,
that's complicated.
In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Welcome back to another episode of Finding Freedom right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. You could be listening one of two ways to this show, as you know, because you are listening. And I want to thank you if you're listening either on the Lions of Liberty Network feed, where you get access to 3 shows per week, a show from Brian on Monday, from Mark on Monday, from Brian on Wednesday, and from me on Thursday, or on my solo Finding Freedom podcast feed. You can subscribe to either, subscribe to both, your choice. But if you do subscribe to the Finding Freedom podcast feed, I'll give you a tip to find it if you're having trouble. You might have to type in Finding Freedom and my name, John Odermatt, and it'll pop right up on any podcasting app. I do appreciate ratings, 5-star ratings, and reviews. And if you leave me a review on my Finding Freedom podcast feed, I promise that I will read it at the end of a show. So thank you in advance for doing that. Thank you in advance for subscribing. I hope you enjoy today's show. All right, we are live to the Lions of Liberty Pride. I'm joined here today by Forrest, also known as the Pancake King, and we'll get to that in a minute. But Forrest, I was on his podcast, his old podcast, several weeks ago. He is launching a new podcast called The Pancake King, Life and Marriage on the Spectrum. I wanted to have him on to talk about that, launch a new podcast, also to get into his backstory, his path to liberty. He's also a Christian as well. I believe also a pastor's son. So this is 2 weeks in a row that I've had pastor's sons on the show. That's a record.
Yeah.
But yeah, Forrest, welcome to Finding Freedom.
Well, thank you, John. It's awesome to be here.
Well, great to have you here, man. And before we get to talking about anything else, I need to know where does the Pancake King name come from? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. And the sad thing is that the story is really not even all that unique. When I was a kid, me and my family were living up in Connecticut for a while, and we would go to this pancake place with our lead pastor. And I was always the one in the group that would always eat the most pancakes at the place. And my pastor commented and called me the Pancake King. So when it came to coming up with like a sort of a fun nickname for this podcast, as well as a book I'm working on the same subject, that's the one that came up.
So does anyone else call you the Pancake King as like your nickname?
No, that's the cool thing is I was able to claim it. I was able to claim it and put ownership on it. Yeah, I mean, I was called Forrest Gump all my life. The Pancake King, though, no one still calls me that.
We're gonna get that to stick. I mean, that's your new podcast name, so I mean, you're obviously going with it. But I like that. I like the Pancake King. So, how many pancakes would you eat? Because when I was a kid, I don't know, 12 in that time frame where you can just eat whatever you want and there's no consequences. I remember eating as many as maybe 12 or 14 pancakes. Would you get up that high? That many pancakes?
Oh, John, I was maybe 6 or 7, when this was happening. If I asked my parents, they'd probably be able to give me a specific number, but I would say probably about 6 or 7 would be the fair range.
Sounds like I'm the Pancake King.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe you should have this show, John.
All right, man. Well, let's. So you have a history. You came in the Liberty movement through friend of the show, Dan Smots. He's been a longtime supporter of Lions of Liberty. In fact, I think Dan was inspired to start his podcast, The System Is Down, by Mark Clare and what Mark was doing with Lions of Liberty early on. So tell us your backstory coming to the ideas of liberty.
So it's interesting because, like you said, Dan Smots was kind of a bit of an inspiration for me, and you said that he was inspired by you guys, which is pretty cool because you guys were the first people within the libertarian movement that I encountered after Dan. So when he first launched his show, The System Is Down, in early 2017, I was practically right on it from the beginning. I wasn't really into politics very much. I feel like the 2016 presidential election kind of forced me to do that in a way. The 2016 election was the first time that I really committed to watching the presidential debates and really kind of following that and really paying attention to the way that, in this case, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton would interact with each other. And it's like, this feels so much more like some crappy reality show than it feels like a serious event. I mean, these are the people who are like meant to be the leader of the free world, right? And this feels like a crappy reality show. And and I was kind of following along what Dan was doing, because at the time he would like tweet his own comments about the debates out on Twitter, and he would like do the hashtag "The System Is Down," and then that became a show. I didn't really listen to podcasts at the time until Dan put that show out, and I started listening to it. And it was really great because what I was feeling after that election, I felt like those feelings were finally being validated somehow. I was also, in a way, my eyes were kind of open to the way the mainstream media works. I specifically remember sitting in a Village Inn with a couple of friends during the election in 2016, and I think it was CNN. It was either CNN or MSNBC. So just think of your favorite absolute bullcrap outlet. And the headline on there, the thing that they were discussing was Donald Trump was sniffling during the presidential debate, and I'm like,
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I'm like, that just really stuck out to me. It was something I always remembered, and I'm no Trump supporter or anything like that. It's just something that stuck out to me and made me go, why is this the media's focus? Like why are they focusing on this? And it just these little things that just didn't add up. So when The System Is Down finally came out, I started listening to that weekly, was listening to the interviews that Dan would do with people, and it really kind of opened my eyes to different parts of the culture that were kind of like not talked about. Dan really showed me how important it was to have difficult, uncomfortable conversations about topics that we don't like to touch. And of course, the number of topics that we don't like to touch has just increased exponentially since then. If you really want to get into the weeds, though, it was 2020, because The System Is Down, up until then, The System Is Down was really the only political podcast I would listen to. But in 2020, when COVID hit and the lockdowns happened, we were hit particularly hard with the lockdowns over here in the Quad Cities in Illinois. When I decided to listen to you guys after I heard Dan mention them several times, that was really great for me, because through listening to you guys, I also discovered the We Are Libertarians Network with Chris Spangle, Remzo W. Martinez, and Brian Nichols. And through them, I discovered Dave Smith. And like it was kind of like a rabbit hole. I kept going down this rabbit hole and like listening to all these other libertarian shows or liberty-minded shows. That was one of the biggest things that got me through the pandemic, was being able to know that there were people out there who were feeling very similarly to me, or thinking very similarly to me. Made me feel a lot more sane, made me feel a lot more validated, and how I was feeling. So I'll just say, right off the bat, I really thank you guys for how you guys helped me through that time, really helped me through the COVID pandemic.
That's good to know, because I mean, honestly, when the lockdowns were going on, when they were really ramped up, and it was a pretty depressing time, really, just seeing, we've had this platform here at Lions of Liberty for several years, and for so long we're talking about the philosophy of liberty, and really getting into the weeds of certain hypothetical scenarios, and if the government ever did this, if the government ever shut down all businesses. I mean, what the lockdowns were, no one ever really put a hypothetical out there for that. So it was honestly very disheartening to see that play out. But you had to talk. Obviously, you had to talk about it, and I'm glad that we were able to help some people. So that makes me feel good that we kept doing the podcast and getting the ideas out there. But so you mentioned a couple names there. You mentioned Remzo W. Martinez. I mentioned this when I was on your show. I love how he gets the middle initial treatment. That's someday I will get the middle initial treatment. Actually, I don't want it. That's a lie.
Oh.
But Remzo is a friend of the show also. Of course, him and Mark have the totally drawing a blank on the name of the comic book podcast.
Second Print Comics.
Second Print Comics. Jeez, Mark's going to kill me. Second Print Comics. It's a free plug for Remzo and Mark there. Check out their podcast. But I wanted to talk to you about podcasting in general. So
Sure.
You found these podcasts. They help get you through this difficult time in everyone's lives, really, in the United States and the world for that matter. What drew you to podcasting? Why did you want to get into this crazy podcasting game?
Well, it goes even further back than the last several years. I actually started a podcast with a friend of mine like a long time ago. This was like somewhere like 2012. And it was nothing crazy. It was just to talk about Star Wars. Like I'm a huge geek. I'm a huge nerd. I was discovering these like kind of geek related podcasts. And I'm like, you know what? I want to do something like that. It didn't last. Like a lot of podcasts. So many of them don't go beyond their 10th episode, and this was pretty much what happened with us for a number of different factors. But a couple years later, I knew that I wanted to do another one. I just wasn't sure what it was about. For me, I love podcasting because it just screams like independence in a way. If you're able to, start making a podcast on a really, really tiny budget, just put a microphone in front of you that you spend maybe $100, you hit record and you start talking. There is so much potential there, and people can really become their own independent journalists, their own talk shows. I really, truly believe that combined with something like Substack is the future, but it will only become the future if more people take advantage of it. And so that was something I was very passionate about with podcasting.
When you say podcasting combined with Substack, can you elaborate on that? You're just talking about the future of a more independent media will be with the platform people get their information from?
Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know, Substack is a platform. I'm pretty positive that it was established by either conservatives or at the very least, liberty-loving people, where they are completely against censorship. And Substack is where you can create your own newsletter. It's one of those things where you click subscribe on their newsletter, and every time they release a new article or their own podcast, because you can release your podcast through Substack too, people will receive an email and they'll be able to read your blog article there. Substack is very much for people who want to strike out and be like their own independent journalists, or just discuss different topics that they're very passionate about. It really allows them to hone in on the thing that they're passionate about and start a community that way.
Yeah, I got into following people on Substack when you know who Alex Berenson is?
The name sounds familiar. I don't think I've ever really gotten into his stuff.
He's the guy. He was suspended from Twitter, and he was very critical of the COVID narrative, and basically he was suspended for tweets that now are just known today as being factual.
Right,
and
of course.
He went to Substack, and that's when I really started following him closely. But he sued Twitter, and he actually I guess he technically won because he's back on Twitter, but there was a settlement, and it's kind of controversial because he crowdfunded his defense, saying that he wasn't going to settle, but ended up settling. But he claims there's still going to be discovery. So I don't know. to be continued there. It's kind of getting down a whole different rabbit hole. But
Yeah.
100% agree with you on that being the future of media. I guess the part where figuring out how we get there. Obviously, there's already people on Substack. There's already people making podcasts, so that's already happening. But the money side of it, where you just think about the hundreds of millions of dollars that, for example, pharmaceutical companies are pumping into cable news and network television and all this stuff. It's going to be interesting to see, and it's already happened to some degree. I've noticed, pharmaceutical advertisements in podcasts, slammed in the middle or, in front of the pre-roll. And as that money starts to come into the podcasting realm, censorship probably will come with it to some degree. I mean, there already is. Spotify already had their Joe Rogan censorship where they put tags on anything that has a mention of the unmentionable. But it'll be interesting how that dynamic plays out. But I wanted to ask you about your new podcast, and you can plug. I know it's going to be. It hasn't launched yet. It's going to be launching here in the next, I think, week or so. You were saying. So Tell us about the launch date, and then it's a really interesting topic, and maybe there's other similar podcasts out there like it, but being so specific, I think, is brilliant. Obviously, you got the Pancake King part first, and then life and marriage on the spectrum. So tell us about that and what you plan to do with the show.
Absolutely. So yeah, like you said, it will be launching real soon. It will be launching with the first 2 episodes across pretty much any podcast platform you can think of on July 27th. And in order to kind of explain how this podcast came about, I kind of have to also explain, what happened to my very previous one that you were in, like one of literally the last episodes. It was crazy though, because like I'll always be grateful for the fact that I was able to get some people that I was listening to long term, on this show before I finally decided to, bring the axe down on it. But the reason why I, just canceled this last podcast, it was simply called Squeaming, and it's still like people can still find it, I guess, if they're interested in it and in accessing those archives. But
it'll be around forever. Podcasts are eternal, so it'll never disappear.
Yeah, I'm not even entirely sure how to feel about that. But but the podcast Squeaming was basically like inspired by like all these different podcasts that I was already listening to when it came to like kind of liberty loving podcasts or libertarian movements. It would talk about pop culture, social issues, and politics. But the problem with the show was that it just did kind of feel like a copy and paste of a couple different podcasts that I loved listening to and just mashing that together. And there just wasn't a clear sense of direction. Me and my co-host would have a good time making it, but there just wasn't a clear sense of direction. There'd be episodes where that we would do where the topics we were focusing on, like one of us was really not that interested in, and so the conversation didn't flow as well as it could have. Mm-hmm. And again, it just after a while, I just realized, this is me just, I guess in a way, trying to be like the quote unquote cool kids, and maybe it's time for me to actually find out what I want to talk about, what it is I want to actually center a podcast around. My marketing consultant happens to be Remzo, and he was telling me during a meeting that if I want to make a new podcast, I want to be able to center in on something that I believe only I can offer. It's and a lot of it is just what makes up myself. Well, having been diagnosed on the autism spectrum, that's one of them. There aren't actually a lot of podcasts focused on autism out there. You would think there would be with the heightened awareness of the spectrum in the last couple of years. But I was even doing a search the other day on Apple Podcasts alone, and most of the podcasts that I found were either from, experts, quote unquote, that are not on the spectrum themselves. They just happen to know a lot about autism. So they're just, reflecting everything that they've learned. Or there were a few podcasts that had to do with, like parents trying to figure out how to like parent their autistic child. And that's all well and good. But I was never able to find a podcast that was A, hosted by someone who is on the autism spectrum, and B, married to someone else who also happened to be on the autism spectrum. That combination, as far as I'm concerned, unless it's buried somewhere out there that I don't know about, it's not out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's no book about it either. And so this is probably like the one project that I've started up that I have confidence will do well in the market, because it's something that I have not been able to find. It's something that I myself would love to listen to if I knew it was out there, and I think it would be very helpful for people.
Yeah, and I think the second thing you said there is the most important, is that it's something that you would listen to yourself and you are looking for. I think so often we forget that when we're, building a product or, coming up with the idea for a podcast. It's very different topic, but the origin of my show, Felony Friday, that was also a very specific, thing, very, very narrowed down, interviewing, for the most part, I was interviewing felons who had been to prison. And there really wasn't, at the time, there was really nothing else out there like that. Now there's quite a bit like that. There's some good shows like that. And I mean, not to rehash this, but I mean, the reason I did change is I wanted to expand, and I want to talk more about what was happening in current events and things like that. But the nice thing about niching down like you did is you can niche way down, and then you can zoom out. I mean, you don't have to stay at that level. But I think it's a brilliant approach that you're taking to it.
Oh, thank you. And so this podcast is essentially about the autism spectrum, breaking down like the myths, or if you will, the misinformation around it, helping people understand what exactly the autism spectrum is and what it's like, the experiences that people on the spectrum have. So obviously I'm only one person on the autism spectrum. If you've met one person on the spectrum, you've met one. You haven't met them all. And so that way I can at least share what my personal experiences are. And so in trying to kind of figure out the target audience for this show, obviously I would love for people on the spectrum to listen to this, because in that way they can feel less alone. They can get to understand a bit more about themselves, and they can also just feel much more positive about their own future and their ability to succeed in life, despite these things that could potentially hold them down or hold them back. And then it would be good for people who are not on the spectrum, because it would just it would expand their knowledge on the subject. It would help them learn how to better interact with their loved ones who are on the spectrum, and just give them some understanding that they might not have had before.
What's your opinion on? I'm sure you've heard this before. How people say with libertarians, well, you're a libertarian, so you're probably on the spectrum. What's your response to something like that? Is that offensive? Like, because I hear that all the time.
Not really. I mean, the funny thing is, I have met plenty of people on the autism spectrum in my life, but as far as their political affiliations go, here's the funny thing, and I don't think enough people realize this. A lot of people on the autism spectrum don't really care about politics very much, unless it's something that they are really hyper fixated on, which is something that autistic people are known for, is that they have these hyperfixations or these obsessions. I use the word hyperfixations because that sounds maybe a little bit nicer, but some autistic people will never care about politics. They'll care more about comic books or it just weird things like poetry, history, something like that. A lot of them don't really care about politics unless it's a hyperfixation of theirs. It happens to be a hyperfixation of mine. So that's one of the reasons why I can say I'm partially an exception. I don't really get offended though if people say that, oh, if you're a libertarian, you're autistic. I don't even know how they're able to make that association. It just sounds to me like there are people who don't even understand what autism is.
Yeah, well, it's probably some of that, and just being lazy with generalizations.
It's
But
social media. It makes you that way, you know?
yeah, exactly. So are you going to be interviewing people on the show, or is it going to be, you talking about these topics, mix of both, or what's your plan there?
So for now, the formula that I have is I take turns with different formulas because I don't like the idea of every episode feeling the exact same as the last one. I
Hmm.
really like changing it up, making people feel like they know they're getting into something new every week, but of course without going so far as to make the show sound unrecognizable. So some episodes are completely solo, and I would have scripts for them, and it would be like kind of sharing a personal experience of mine, or it would be talking about a certain aspect of autism. So I have my solo episodes, then I'll have my one-on-one episodes where it's either with my wife or it's with a friend of mine who is also on the spectrum, a family member, someone where we can just get together and talk about autism openly, or or occasionally just share stories about ourselves so you can kind of get a window into my life. I mean,
Hmm.
I recorded an episode where it was just me and my youngest brother sitting in the local coffee shop, and he was telling me a story about how he wrecked two cars in the span of several weeks, just to again, just sort of that window into my life and the people in it, just the stuff that matters to me. And then I have a third formula that I'm still kind of in the experimenting phase of. I call it the waffle court to capitalize on the Pancake King title.
Nice.
And it's me and a few of my closest friends just having the types of conversations that we would normally have, you know, uh, off recordings. Still kind of working on how to get that to fit into the overall formula, but I think I'm getting closer.
Cool, cool. I like that. Having different approaches, bit of a variety view into the show. So that's cool. So let's talk about some current events. You want to do that? There are a
Yeah,
couple
sounds
things
good.
I wanted to hit on that are going on, and I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure you've been following everything's going on with the Roe v. Wade stuff, and
Hmm.
I've been talking about controversial topics earlier. Those tough conversations. This is a tough one for a lot of people,
Yeah.
but this story out of Dallas where there's a pregnant woman driving in the HOV lane. She gets pulled over and says that because she's pregnant, that's her passenger. Um, so I'm assuming that this woman is trolling to a certain degree, but I mean, my perspective on this, I don't have an issue with it. I think she should be allowed to drive in the HOV lane. I mean, part of it is that, yeah, I do believe that life begins at conception,
Hmm.
but also, I mean, screw the HOV lane rules. I mean, anything you can do to get around it, I'm all for it. So, what's your view on this one?
Well, I can't really speak for the HOV lane angle, but what I did think was pretty funny was that she's referring to the baby that's still in the womb. She's referring to it as a second person, so technically she wasn't driving alone. And it's like, that's
Right.
great that you're referring to the baby as a second person. That's wonderful. There's just one little problem there. Little Timmy can't vouch for you. He can't vouch for you. He can't speak for you. He can't, try to defend you. I mean, it's just, it's an infant in the womb. So unless she was genuinely trolling, I just think it's, I don't know, just kind of a bad reason to come up with for justifying driving on the HOV lane, even if the fact that she got in trouble for this in the first place is dumb by conceptually.
Wouldn't it be the same thing though if say she had a newborn? I mean, the newborn can't vouch for you. The newborn is just in a in a car seat. So I don't know. I really don't see a difference. It kind of reminds me of there's been different stories going around about this where people saying that, well, okay, so if life begins at conception or if life begins at some point before birth, then shouldn't child support then begin at that time as well? Shouldn't I forget what the other example was, but it was like, shouldn't shouldn't the voting age, this one's just crazy. Shouldn't the voting age then be pulled back 9 months so people who can vote 9 months earlier if it's a life at conception? But what's your view on stuff like that?
Yeah, man, I'm not even entirely sure. When it comes to the whole just the Roe v. Wade situation, because I believe, I'll just go ahead and say, I'm a pro-life person. I believe that it's life begins at conception. For me, that stuff is pretty obvious. I've tended to avoid, having conversations like that with people. The most that I did after Roe v. Wade was overturned was that, I asked a couple of different women, how do you feel about this? What do you think of it? And obviously they had different opinions, different perspectives on it. Some people were fine with it. Some people hated it. But I don't like delving too deep into topics that I just know very little about. What I do know is that Roe v. Wade was obviously around when I was born. It first was established in 1973. That's long before my time. So it was actually really weird for me when I heard that it was overturned, because that is something that I heard about all my life, and now it's just gone.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, even now I'm still trying to figure out what to make of that. But again, I don't like to really form these opinions on topics that I just don't know a whole lot about, and that's one where I didn't delve too much into it.
Yeah, no, I can definitely respect where you're coming from there. And yeah, I mean, 100% agree with you. I never thought in my lifetime, I don't know if anybody thought, I would think they were delusional if they told me, 5 years ago that Roe v. Wade is going to be overturned in 2022. I think anybody would have thought that was a possibility. So it's interesting that it's happening now, and I'll just give my viewpoint on, without going too deep into it. Really, when we look at what's the libertarian principled position on on abortion, what should it be? I mean, there's pro-life, there's pro-choice libertarians out there, but overturning Roe v. Wade it's not an intervention in itself. All it's doing is taking a federal law off the books and rolling it back to the states. And honestly, with something like this, I think it's a cultural issue, and the closer it can get to the local community and ultimately the family, that's the best. And I mean, I don't think that women should be thrown in jail or anything like that. I don't want that to happen. But I mean, this is the way I look at it. Just to put it generally, and people can give me crap for not taking a strong position on this. But at the end of the day, I want more babies to live, and however we can get to that point, I'm gonna fully support that. But
yeah, I mean, I work with foster children every summer, and so I've thought about the idea, because these foster children obviously have led some pretty crappy lives. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to work with them, right? And I have thought to myself before, it's man, if their parents had decided that they didn't want them at the beginning, I wouldn't even know who these kids are, and that if there's any place in the whole abortion debate that I kind of stand in or have a pretty firm belief in, that's where it's at. Because I think to myself, I wouldn't know who these kids are if their parents decided not to have them at the beginning. So regardless of how absolutely crappy their parents treated them, or or the fact that they decided later that they didn't want them, I am at least grateful for the fact that they decided they will have them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And anything that can be done to get or to improve the current situation with the foster system and how difficult it is to adopt in many states, and it's different state to state. Anything that can be done to make that easier, obviously, would be a good change.
Absolutely.
But so turning gears here, I just want to talk about one more story, because this is something that I've talked about this on my show months ago. How when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was this, just right away almost, there was this initial global backlash, not only against Vladimir Putin, but against anybody who's Russian or Belarusian. And the one thing that happened is the tennis associations. It happened in several different sports, but it happened in tennis where they wouldn't allow Russians or Belarusians. I think it's Belarusian. Is that the right word? To compete in tournaments, in championships, in the tennis events. And actually, the women's, I guess it's the Women's Tennis Association. They fined these, Wimbledon being one of them. I think it's the All England Lawn Tennis Club and the LTA fined them for stopping these athletes from participating. So turn ahead to this last, Wimbledon tournament that just occurred, and there's a woman who won it, who was born in Russia, trains in Kazakhstan, which apparently is common. And it's funny, in this article I sent you, there's a picture of Borat in the middle of it, surrounded by 4 women, just thrown in there because Kazakhstan. It just
Right.
I guess you got to put some picture there. But so she wins it as like a, so it's like a middle finger in their face, and people didn't know how to react. Like, should we be cheering? Should we be clapping? Is this? I mean, what should we do? Can we smile? Can we laugh at this? Can we be happy? It's just such an absurd situation that an entire people are being painted as being like evil because of the actions of the government of those people. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, don't we always have to say that, like, whenever we, sling mud at China, we always have to say it's the Communist Party, not the people themselves. It's like we never hate on the Chinese people. It's the Chinese Communist Party we don't like, right? I think it's the same thing with Russia. And I think that's really unfortunate. The idea that it's like, how would we feel? Like, I don't know, if some country decided that Joe Biden was the absolute worst or something like that, for some heinous things that he did. Like, how would we feel if we were like kept out of certain events, activities, sports, what have you? Yeah, I think that's wrong. I think vilifying an entire country full of people because of the actions of their otherwise tyrannical leader, I think that's wrong. I wouldn't really say that there's a whole lot more I could even say about that, except I do find it ironic that do you watch the show Stranger Things?
No.
No, okay. Well, to put it briefly and very simply, in the latest, so the whole show is set in the 1980s, so you got to have that context.
Okay.
The show does focus on kind of the Soviet Union at one point. Yeah, it's a little crazy, but there's a few Russian characters in that show, and this latest season came out just a couple weeks ago. There's a couple Russian characters in this show who are actually genuinely good people, and and like even a couple of the scumbags in there make noble decisions in the end. I'm a little bit surprised of the timing of when that came out, because they shot all that like 2 years ago, so obviously long before the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict. But I think
you're saying you're surprised that they left that in there, making them good people.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised that they left that in there. I mean, because in all honesty, even if you were to cut it, it wouldn't even really impact the story that much. But that's there, and so I'm like, well, clearly we understand. And this was, the show was set in the Soviet Union. Clearly that these writers understood that even though, you had the Soviet Union during the 1980s, there were probably good Russian people in there. So, I mean, that was something that stuck out to me when watching it a couple weeks ago. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't really give you too deep of an answer, except it is wrong to, to keep people out of there. Because these people, I mean, like when they get into these sports events, that's their life. That's their passion. They want to do this. They're thinking in the long term with this. And when you're kicking them out, I mean, it's the same thing as like kicking out, sports players due to the vaccine mandates last year,
Yeah.
in which case they were still struggling with that. Thankfully, not as much as they were before, but there's still some people trying to get back in.
I think actually, Novak Djokovic, who just won Wimbledon, and the U.S. Open's coming up, and he's not vaccinated. He wasn't allowed to play in the Australian Open. I don't think he's going to be allowed to play in the U.S. Open. I'm pretty sure there's a vax mandate.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It
Yeah.
really is unfortunate. I look forward to the day when those types of requirements are just, not only like kind of disregarded, but also seen as immoral. I do believe that
Mm-hmm.
as humans, we can evolve and we can get better. History has a tendency to rhyme, but that doesn't mean we can't, write some new lines in there.
Yeah. So on that note, just to zoom out to get your perspective on the direction of, we'll just keep it to the direction of this country. We see Joe Biden, if you believe polls, which I generally believe polls directionally. I think they fudge the numbers up somewhat, and there's a lot of that going on, especially head-to-head political polls. But you look at the Joe Biden's approval polls; he's at historical lows. Congress has been at they get lower every year. People disapprove of them more.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that, I mean, is that a good thing that there's less trust in our government, and just overall as I don't want to say as a country, because we're not all. I mean, a country is made up of individuals, but as a people who live in the United States, do you think we're trending more towards people who would support things like these vaccine mandates, or do you think we're trending more away from that, where people kind of had their eyes opened from the lockdowns?
Yeah, I like to think that we're in the latter. I mean, I think it's such a testament, really, to the resilience of some of the people in our country when you consider the fact that over the last 2.5 years, we went through the COVID pandemic, the lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, all that kind of stuff. But we never got, and thank God, we never got as bad as other countries did. Did we still get bad? Yes. But we never did get as bad. Because here's the thing. If more people in this country complied with, the mandates and the lockdowns and all that kind of stuff, if more people, and probably didn't even have to take that many more, but if more people in this country complied with all that stuff, we would still be dealing with the majority of that stuff now. And not only that, it would probably get worse. I can't even imagine what it would be like, dealing with stopping to get gas for $5 a gallon. Oh, but also I have to put on a mask, before I walk into the gas station to get a receipt, or like even worse, have to show some sort of proof of vaccination. So what I am saying is that we could definitely be worse. And I think the reason why we're not is because there's a good portion of this country still that has the resilience needed to just keep us afloat. And of course, coming from my Christian faith, I tend to stick to like optimism and hope, and I think it's extremely important. It was extremely important for me to stay optimistic during the pandemic. Otherwise, I don't know where I would be. I certainly wouldn't be starting a podcast after after coming out of it if I didn't think it was going to have some sort of positive impact. I think as far as the direction of the country goes, that's actually even one of the reasons why I started this podcast. On top of being informative about autism, informative about marriage on the autism spectrum and stuff like that, I want to I want to put something out there that young people around my age and younger can turn to every week, where they can feel less alone. They can feel more positive about their future, because there are so many people you see these people all the time on social media, including libertarians. Libertarians are guilty of this too. There is way too much negativity in the social space.
I agree.
No matter what side of the political spectrum it comes from. There are people, they're like libertarian people or right-leaning people that I had a lot of respect for, like as soon as like last year. And now this year, I don't really respect them anymore, because I feel like all their message is just negativity, chaos. Oh, you better buckle up. It's going to get worse. I think it's a terrible message. I mean, there might be a little bit of realism in that, but I just don't think it's the right message to tell young people. If we want the next generation to be stronger, we need to change our message. It's so important. And so that's what I'm doing with this podcast. And this podcast isn't even like, it's not, at least right now, it's not even going into politics. And that's by design, because I want people to be able to catch a break, feel good about themselves, feel good about the world around them, feel like they can make it. I mean, we live in America, with a country where, if we work hard, we're supposed to make it. I want people to feel like, and especially people on the autism spectrum, I want them to feel like they can make it. And I'm hoping that through this show, I know I just took it back around to that, but I am hoping that through this show, it can help embolden young people for the next generation. Change the message. That's what I'm saying.
Well, like you were saying, your show might not talk about politics, but it's also not going to have a woke agenda.
No,
so
no.
That's probably more important. So,
yeah.
And that's why I think it's so important that I don't want to say libertarians, people who are liberty leaning, people who love freedom, people who believe in the individual. I think that's why it's so important, like you're doing now, that they start podcasts that are not politically focused, that they're about what you're passionate about. And in talking through what you're passionate about and in talking with other people, it's just that's gonna come through naturally. Your values, your principles are just gonna show through naturally, and people will see it. So it doesn't have to be overtly political. This is what I think. This is what you should think. And all of that. Just by doing the show, I think without even doing it intentionally, you will be helping to spread the message of liberty, I think. But running out of time here. Before I let you go, just say one more time the show name, when it's going to come out, and if you want to talk about the first episode or two or anything like that.
Sure. So yeah, the podcast name is The Pancake King, Life and Marriage on the Spectrum. It will be premiering with its first 2 episodes on July 27th. The first episode is kind of more or less just like a brief prologue, and the second episode goes into a certain aspect of my experiences on the spectrum, specifically what it's like for me with the kind of mind that I have while standing in a worship service, and like how autism plays a role in that. There will be some connections between my experiences with autism and how it affects my Christian faith. I don't really get into politics in the show, but I have no problem being open about my Christian faith on the show. That'll be interesting. I'll definitely listen to that one, because and if people are kind of picky about lengths, there are episodes that are like less than 10 minutes long, and then episodes that are like more 20 to 30 minutes, just depending on where you're at and how much time you've got on your hands. But if you want any updates on that or just to keep up on my blog, you can go to thepancakeking.substack.com. It'll all be there.
All right, Forrest, thanks for coming on the show. His show is called The Pancake King, Life and Marriage on the Spectrum. We did get a comment from a viewer here saying that the pancakes you were eating were probably bigger than the ones I was eating. That's probably fair, especially if you're going out to a breakfast place, and I was probably eating just small, homemade pancakes. So maybe you are the true Pancake King. Forrest, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Of course, man. Thanks, John.
Thanks for tuning in for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. And I just want to remind you that you could have heard that episode live if you're a member of the Lions of Liberty Pride. So if you're a Pride member, one of the perks is at any level, you get access to our live content, either streamed through Facebook or streamed on a private YouTube link. And you can comment, ask questions, all that good stuff. You also get access in our Lions of Liberty Pride to all of our bonus content, our bonus shows, Conspiracy Corner, Degenerate Gamblers, Brian's Good Morning Bleephead. You can check any of them out, and they come with the cost of doing business for as little as $5 a month. Of course, there's levels above that where you can produce shows and talk to us in our monthly calls, all good stuff. And we would love for you to come and be a part of the Lions of Liberty Pride. You can do so by going to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. Do it now. If you've been thinking about it but putting it off, do it now. You can go there to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, or if you're like locals and you don't like Patreon, go to lionsofliberty.locals.com. Come join us. The pride's growing. All right, well, that's all I have for the show today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can share it around. You can tell a friend about it, and you can maybe tell a stranger on the street, hey, check out Finding Freedom. That guy, John Odermatt, he's got some good stuff he's talking about. Or, you know what, better yet, even buy a t-shirt. Buy a Finding Freedom t-shirt at lionsofliberty.store. Wear the t-shirt and just point to it. Just point at strangers and point to your t-shirt. And they'll get it. They'll understand. If they don't, I don't care. But it's worth a try. I would do it if I were you. But I'm not. What I am is someone who's ending the show right now. And I'm going to tell you one more thing. Always remember to keep your head up and the fire's liberty burning.